For centuries, science claimed to have all the answers. But what if everything we thought we knew was wrong? 45 times scientists were completely wrong about everything, and these are the shocking lies you were never told. From medical miracles to cosmic delusions, science has led us astray more than once. Buckle up as we uncover the devastating truths that were buried for too long. The betrayals will leave you questioning everything you thought was real. Chapter 1: The Flat Earth Theory. For centuries, the scientific community clung to the belief that the Earth was flat. Ancient civilizations, from the Greeks to the medieval thinkers, accepted this idea without question. But as exploration began to push the boundaries of human knowledge, evidence of a spherical Earth emerged. Yet, this groundbreaking truth wasn't widely accepted. Why? Power, politics, and fear of disrupting the established worldview kept the flat Earth belief alive far longer than it should have. The real betrayal wasn't just in the idea, it was the fear to challenge tradition, holding humanity back from real progress. When Columbus sailed across the Atlantic, it wasn't just a journey, it was a confrontation with the deep-rooted myth. The truth? The Earth was round, and centuries of exploration from Magellan to Galileo finally proved it. But the damage had been done, knowledge was delayed, and the world was kept in the dark for far too long. But the Earth wasn't the only thing misrepresented by science. What if our understanding of the very air we breathe was a lie? Let's look at the dangerous theory of bad air. Chapter 2: The Phlogiston Theory. In the 17th century, scientists were convinced that combustion released a substance called phlogiston, a mysterious, invisible element. The idea was simple. When a material burned, phlogiston was released into the air. It made perfect sense at the time, fitting neatly into the science of the day. But this scientific truth was built on nothing but empty assumptions. In reality, it was oxygen, not phlogiston, that made combustion happen. The theory held sway for over 100 years, stifling real progress in chemistry. Think about it. Could the greatest minds of an era be so wrong? The answer lies in the reluctance to question a widely accepted idea. It took Antoine Lavoisier to finally destroy the phlogiston theory, replacing it with the truth: fire consumes oxygen. The cost of this scientific mistake? Decades of misdirection, hindering the discovery of what we know about combustion today. But this wasn't the only time science misled us. What about the cure-all treatments that ended up being deadly? Let's look at the brutal practice of bloodletting. Chapter 3: Bloodletting as a cure. For centuries, bloodletting was considered a miracle cure for everything from fevers to mental illness. Physicians believed that draining bad blood would restore balance and health. It was widely accepted, despite the obvious risks. What science didn't realize was that bloodletting didn't just fail to heal, it often made patients sicker or killed them. The problem wasn't just ignorance, it was the unchallenged belief in the theory. Great minds of the time, from Hippocrates to medieval scholars, swore by it. But why? Because questioning such a deeply rooted practice was considered heresy. The result? Millions of lives lost, with people subjected to unnecessary and harmful procedures. The truth only emerged when science began to unravel the mysteries of the circulatory system. Bloodletting wasn't a curate, was a lethal, archaic method that betrayed the very people it was supposed to save. But bloodletting wasn't the only danger scientists turned a blind eye to. Let's dive into a theory about disease that kept humanity in the dark for centuries. Chapter 4: The Geocentric Universe. For over 1,000 years, science held firmly to the belief that Earth was the center of the universe. This geocentric model was so deeply ingrained that it became a cornerstone of both scientific and religious thought. The idea seemed logical at the time. Why wouldn't everything revolve around us? But as more advanced telescopes and observations revealed the true structure of the cosmos, the geocentric model began to crumble. Despite this, it wasn't until Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler that the heliocentric model, the sun at the center, finally gained traction. Yet, this truth was fiercely opposed by the Church and many scientists, who feared the collapse of centuries-old beliefs. The betrayal wasn't just the mistake itself, it was the system of power that prevented the truth from emerging sooner. For centuries, humanity was trapped in an outdated worldview, slowing scientific progress and limiting our understanding of the vast universe. But the geocentric model wasn't the only myth holding us back. What if the cause of disease was just as wrong? Let's explore the miasma theory that misled generations. Chapter 5. Miasma theory of disease. For centuries, the prevailing belief in science was that diseases were caused by bad air or miasma, foul-smelling vapors in the atmosphere. This theory dominated for so long that it shaped how society dealt with outbreaks like cholera and the plague. The idea seemed plausible. If bad air could be the cause, then improving sanitation and ventilation should solve the problem. But the real cause of disease wasn't miasma, it was bacteria and viruses, invisible pathogens that could spread far beyond the reach of bad air. The mistake wasn't just scientific ignorance, it was a deadly distraction. While the world focused on cleaning the air, millions continued to suffer and die from infectious diseases. It wasn't until John Snow's groundbreaking work in 1854, tracing the cholera outbreak to contaminated water, that the truth finally came to light. The betrayal here wasn't just the lie, it was the suffering caused by failing to see what was really at the heart of the epidemic. But this wasn't the last time science would ignore the obvious. Let's look at how life was once thought to spring from nothing. Chapter 6. Spontaneous generation. For centuries, scientists believed in spontaneous generation, the idea that life could arise spontaneously from non-living matter. Maggots appearing on decaying meat, for example, were thought to be born from the meat itself. The theory was so deeply ingrained in science that it shaped experiments and the understanding of life. But this theory was completely wrong. The real truth came with Louis Pasteur's experiments in the 19th century, showing that life only comes from pre-existing life, not from inanimate objects. The scientific community had clung to this myth for so long, wasting valuable time and resources. The betrayal wasn't just the incorrect theory, it was the decades of missed opportunities to understand the true origins of life. By the time the truth was revealed, the damage had already set back biological sciences, as scientists had been so focused on disproving spontaneous generation that they overlooked other critical discoveries. But this wasn't the only biological misconception that held us back. Let's take a look at how ancient medicine was guided by completely false beliefs about the human body. Chapter 7. The Four Humors. Ancient Greek medicine was built on the belief that human health depended on the balance of four bodily fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If any humor was out of balance, it was thought to cause illness. This theory shaped medical practices for over 1,500 years. Treatments like bloodletting and purging were prescribed to restore balance, often with disastrous results. But science didn't challenge the theory for centuries. It wasn't until the modern understanding of anatomy and the advent of the scientific method that the truth finally came out. The four humors were not responsible for disease. The real cause of illness came from pathogens and bodily malfunctions. The betrayal wasn't just in the false theory, it was the lives lost to treatments that only worsened conditions. For generations, the wrong idea was treated as fact, and medical progress was stifled because of it. But this wasn't the only deadly belief that dominated medicine. Let's take a closer look at the pseudoscience that nearly wiped out entire populations. Chapter 8. Eugenics. Eugenics, the pseudoscience advocating for selective breeding to improve the human race, gained popularity in the early 20th century. Scientists promoted the idea that certain people, particularly those from marginalized race, were genetically inferior and should be prevented from reproducing. It was a theory built on prejudice, not science. Yet, it was widely accepted by influential scientists, policymakers, and even governments. Forced sterilizations, segregation, and even genocide were justified by eugenic principles. The devastating consequences of this pseudoscience can be seen in the horrors of the Holocaust, where millions were targeted and not killed. Eugenics didn't just misguide science, it weaponized it, using it as a tool for racial discrimination and oppression. The betrayal wasn't only in the flawed science, it was in the manipulation of science to support inhumane policies that cost millions of lives and set back social progress for decades. But that wasn't the only instance where science supported disastrous ideologies. Let's now look at a toxic belief that turned agriculture into a deadly experiment. Chapter 9: Lysenkoism in Soviet Agriculture. Trofim Lysenko, a Soviet agronomist, rejected Mendelian genetics in favor of his own unproven theories of inheritance. Backed by Joseph Stalin, Lysenko's pseudoscientific ideas were forced onto Soviet agriculture, with disastrous consequences. He claimed that plants could inherit traits acquired during their lifetime, a theory that defied centuries of genetic research. Under Lysenko's guidance, crops failed, famine spread, and millions of people suffered. The Soviet regime prioritized Lysenko's ideology over science, preventing true progress in genetics and agriculture. Scientists who opposed him were silenced, imprisoned, or executed. The betrayal wasn't just the harm caused by Lysenko's theory, it was the destruction of livelihoods and lives, all in the name of a politically motivated, scientifically false belief. The tragedy of Lysenkoism is a glaring example of how dangerous it can be when politics and pseudoscience collide. But this wasn't the last time science was used to deceive the masses. Let's now talk about how a health miracle turned into a deadly lie. Chapter 10: Smoking does not cause cancer. For decades, tobacco companies and even some scientists denied the link between smoking and cancer. Despite growing evidence that cigarettes were deadly, the tobacco industry funded studies that suggested smoking was harmless. This orchestrated misinformation campaign kept millions smoking, unaware of the real danger they were in. It wasn't until the 1950s, when doctors began publishing studies that directly linked smoking to cancer, that the truth started to come out. But by then, millions had already died from lung cancer and heart disease caused by tobacco. The betrayal wasn't just in the industry's lies, it was in how science was manipulated for profit, putting public health at risk. The real consequences of this deception weren't just physical. Lives were destroyed, families torn apart, and the scientific community's credibility was severely damaged. But this wasn't the only time science was manipulated for profit. Let's explore another miracle cure that left more harm than good. Chapter 11: The theory of phrenology in the 19th century. Phrenology, the study of skull shapes to determine character traits, was considered a cutting-edge science. Scientists believed that the bumps and indentations on a person's skull could reveal everything from intelligence to morality. It was widely accepted and even used to justify social hierarchies, including racist beliefs that certain races were inherently inferior. The theory was so convincing that it influenced everything from hiring practices to the treatment of marginalized groups. But phrenology was nothing more than pseudoscience, built on assumptions with no empirical foundation. It was eventually debunked, but not before causing significant harm, reinforcing harmful stereotypes and social inequalities. The betrayal wasn't just in the false science, it was in how it was used to manipulate and oppress entire groups of people. The truth took far too long to come to light, and phrenology's legacy still lingers in certain biases we see today. But this wasn't the only scientific theory used to justify oppression. Let's look at another truth about Mars that science got horribly wrong. Chapter 12: The Mars Canals Delusion. In the late 19th century, astronomer Percival Lowell claimed to have discovered canals on Mars, suggesting that intelligent life lived there. Lowell's findings were widely accepted by scientists and fueled speculation about Martian civilizations. The idea that we weren't alone in the universe sparked imaginations and dreams of interplanetary contact. But the canals weren't canals at all. They were optical illusions, misinterpreted by Lowell's telescope and later proven to be a product of human imagination. Despite mounting evidence contradicting the theory, the idea of Martian canals persisted for decades, hindering our understanding of the planet. The betrayal wasn't just in the falsified claims, it was in the way these misconceptions delayed scientific progress in exploring Mars. The truth would only come after much of the world's hopes about life on Mars had been dashed. But what if the very air we breathe was also a lie? Let's dive into the dangerous theory that almost cost humanity its health. Chapter 13. The role of stomach acid. For years, scientists believed that stomach acid's only role was to aid in digestion. It was seen as an unimportant fluid, simply helping to break down food. But recent research has uncovered that stomach acid plays a far more significant role in protecting our bodies from harmful pathogens. It acts as a barrier, killing bacteria and viruses before they enter our intestines. The misunderstanding of stomach acid's role led to widespread overprescription of antacid medications and an underestimation of the importance of gut health. The real betrayal was in how science dismissed the complexities of the digestive system, focusing only on the most obvious functions. As a result, countless people suffered from weakened immune systems and digestive issues that could have been prevented. The truth, however, has transformed the way we approach nutrition and health. But this wasn't the only misstep in medical science. Let's look at how early humans were believed to have had a caveman diet. Chapter 14. The misconception of the caveman diet. For years, many scientists and nutritionists believed that early humans lived solely on raw meat, following a caveman diet that was high in protein and fat. This idea suggested that modern humans should follow a similar diet for optimal health. But modern anthropology has revealed that early humans had a much more varied diet, including fruits, vegetables, and even grains. The belief in the caveman diet ignored the complexities of early human diets and how humans adapted to their environment. This misconception not only misled nutrition science, but also led to the promotion of extreme, unhealthy diets. The betrayal wasn't just in the misinterpretation of history, it was in how it influenced generations of dieters to adopt unsustainable eating habits, putting their health at risk. But the true origins of humanity's diet weren't the only things misunderstood. Let's now look at the battle over the telephone's invention. Chapter 15. The invention of the telephone. Most people know that Alexander Graham Bell is credited with inventing the telephone, but the truth is much more complicated. While Bell did make significant advancements in telecommunication, he wasn't the only one working on the technology. Elisha Gray, a fellow inventor, was in a bitter legal battle with Bell over the patent rights to the telephone. Both men had developed similar technologies almost simultaneously, but Bell's marketing prowess and legal maneuvering won out. The fight over the invention of the telephone wasn't just about technology, it was about who controlled the future of global communication. The betrayal wasn't just in the patent dispute, it was in how science and invention were often overshadowed by power plays and legal battles, leaving the public unaware of the true collaborative nature of the breakthrough. But the telephone wasn't the only invention clouded by controversy. Let's look at how the myth of human blood misled the scientific community for centuries. Chapter 16. The great human blood myth. For centuries, scientists believed human blood was just like that of other animals, nothing special. Blood was seen as a simple fluid, with a basic role in circulation. But modern science has revealed that human blood is far more complex and unique than anyone imagined. Our blood has ability to transport oxygen, fight infections, and even heal wounds is an intricate system, finely tuned over millions of years. The misunderstanding of blood's true importance led to oversimplified treatments and a lack of focus on blood disorders, like anemia and hemophilia. The real betrayal was in how science treated this life-sustaining substance as insignificant for far too long, preventing advances in medical research and delaying breakthroughs in blood-related illnesses. It wasn't until the 20th century that the complexities of human blood were finally understood. By then, millions had already suffered. But this wasn't the only critical misunderstanding in science. Let's now look at a seemingly harmless theory about plant life that turned out to be a deadly mistake. Chapter 17. The Perils of DDT. In the mid-20th century, DDT was hailed as a miracle pesticide effective at killing mosquitoes and other pests, saving millions of lives from diseases like malaria. It seemed like the answer to the world's pest problems. However, what scientists didn't foresee was the long-term environmental and health effects. DDT didn't just poison pests, it accumulated in the food chain, leading to the decline of wildlife, especially birds of prey. Worse, it caused human health problems, including cancer and developmental issues in children. The betrayal wasn't just in the failure to understand DDT's effects, it was in how the scientific community ignored mounting evidence of its dangers, driven by industry pressure. By the time DDT was banned, the damage was done, leaving ecosystems irreparably harmed and public trust in science shaken. But this wasn't the only time science ignored harmful substances. Next, we'll explore how science's early understanding of X-rays led to a devastating public health crisis. Chapter 18. The X-ray disaster. In the early 20th century, X-rays were hailed as one of the greatest discoveries in medicine. They offered a way to see inside the body without surgery, revolutionizing diagnostics. But scientists and doctors were unaware of the harmful effects of radiation. People exposed to X-rays, including patients and even medical staff, suffered from radiation burns, hair loss, and, tragically, cancer. The most devastating part: doctors continued to use X-rays indiscriminately, oblivious to the long-term risks. The betrayal wasn't just in the ignorance, it was in how the scientific community downplayed the dangers for years, choosing immediate success over patient safety. It wasn't until decades later that the true scope of the damage came to light, as radiation-related illnesses became apparent. But this wasn't the last time science's excitement led to disaster. Let's look at another medical breakthrough that caused more harm than good. Chapter 19. The myth of the cold sore cure. In the 1960s, the pharmaceutical industry promised a miracle cure for cold sores caused by the herpes simplex virus. Scientists developed treatments that seemed effective at first, but they were far from a permanent solution. The truth was, the virus couldn't be eradicated, and the treatments only offered temporary relief. Worse, some of the drugs were not only ineffective, but also caused serious side effects, including liver damage and allergic reactions. The betrayal wasn't just in the false advertising, it was in how the medical community pushed these treatments without fully understanding the virus, leaving patients frustrated and harmed. Cold sores continued to plague millions, and the pharmaceutical companies continued profiting off ineffective solutions, delaying the development of truly effective antiviral therapies. But this wasn't the only time science's promises fell short. Let's look at how the theory of race was once weaponized by scientists. Chapter 20. The theory of racial superiority. In the early 20th century, certain scientists used flawed and biased methods to argue that certain races were inherently superior to others. These ideas were based on misleading data, flawed IQ tests, and deeply ingrained prejudices. Racial superiority theories were not only widely accepted in academic circles, but they were also used to justify policies like segregation, forced sterilizations, and the exclusion of marginalized communities. The betrayal wasn't just in the flawed science, it was in how it was weaponized to oppress and harm entire groups of people. This pseudoscience led to a century of racial discrimination, holding back social progress and deepening inequality. The truth came too late, but its legacy still reverberates today, showing how easily science can be manipulated to serve harmful ideologies. But this wasn't the only time science was manipulated for power. Let's look at how a seemingly innocent discovery about human reproduction turned into a disaster. Chapter 21: The Role of Oxygen in Health. For years, scientists believed that oxygen's primary role was simply respiration to keep us alive. But recent discoveries have uncovered that oxygen does far more than just fuel our cells. It's essential for our immune systems, wound healing, and even cellular regeneration. Yet, for decades, this understanding was ignored, leading to ineffective treatments for conditions like chronic wounds and infections. The betrayal wasn't just in the limited understanding of oxygen, it was in how this critical element was underestimated for so long, delaying major breakthroughs in healthcare. Once we recognized oxygen's broader role in maintaining health, it became a game changer, ushering in innovative treatments for everything from cancer to wound care. But why did it take so long to unlock this truth? The answer lies in a medical system that failed to look beyond the basics. But oxygen wasn't the only element misjudged by science. Let's take a look at a theory that misunderstood heredity for centuries. Chapter 22: The Homunculus Theory of Reproduction. In the 17th century, scientists believed in the homunculus theory, the idea that human reproduction involved a tiny, fully formed person inside either the sperm or the egg. This bizarre theory had widespread influence, shaping early understandings of genetics and human reproduction. The belief held that all life existed as miniature humans, waiting to be unleashed by the process of fertilization. But as modern biology revealed, the process was far more complex, with genes and cellular development guiding the creation of life, not a preformed miniature person. The real betrayal wasn't just in the misdirection, it was in how this absurd idea stifled research and understanding for centuries. The discovery of DNA and the complexities of genetic inheritance overturned the homunculus theory, but only after years of wasted effort and misguided study. But the misunderstanding of life didn't stop there. Let's now look at another truth that turned out to be completely wrong, this time in the world of physics. Chapter 23: The Banning of DDT. DDT, once hailed as a miracle pesticide that saved millions from malaria, was later revealed to have devastating environmental and health impacts. Initially, its effectiveness was unparalleled. Mosquito populations dropped, and diseases like malaria seemed to be under control. But over time, scientists began to notice the unintended consequences. DDT accumulated in ecosystems, poisoning wildlife and contaminating the food chain. It wasn't until Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book, Silent Spring, that the full impact of DDT was revealed. The betrayal wasn't just the harmful effects, it was the scientific community's failure to recognize the danger sooner, driven by corporate interests that ignored the mounting evidence. By the time DDT was banned in the 1970s, the damage was irreversible, and ecosystems were decimated. But DDT wasn't the only chemical disaster ignored by science. Let's explore how early chemical research led to one of the deadliest industrial accidents in history. Chapter 24: The X-ray Disaster. In the early days of X-ray technology, scientists and doctors believed the benefits far outweighed any risks. X-rays were used for everything from diagnosing broken bones to measuring shoe sizes, but no one knew the dangers of radiation exposure at the time. What started as a groundbreaking medical tool became a silent killer. Radiation exposure caused burns, cancers, and genetic mutations, with many doctors and patients unaware of the risk. The betrayal wasn't just in the ignorance, it was in how science failed to protect the very people who trusted it. It wasn't until the 1920s and 1930s that scientists started to fully understand the dangers of radiation, but by then, the damage had already been done. But the X-ray disaster wasn't the only time science ignored dangerous knowledge. Let's look at how a theory about vaccines was manipulated to create a worldwide crisis. Chapter 25: The Cold Fusion Debacle. In 1989, two electrochemists, Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann, claimed to have achieved cold fusion and energy-producing reaction that, if true, would revolutionize energy production. The excitement was electric. This was the ultimate dream of free, limitless energy. But the euphoria was short-lived. Other scientists couldn't replicate the results, and the scientific community quickly debunked the claim. The cold fusion debacle wasn't just a failed experiment, it was a full-blown scientific scandal. The media frenzy around the discovery led to public disillusionment, and the scientific community was forced to face the consequences of rushing to make sensational claims. The betrayal wasn't just in the false hope, it was in how the scientific community's eagerness to make history clouded their judgment, costing time, credibility, and resources. But cold fusion wasn't the only scientific scandal to shake the world. Let's take a look at another misstep that altered history forever. Chapter 31. The spinning Earth myth. For centuries, it was believed that Earth's rotation was too slow to be noticeable. Early scientists claimed that the Earth spun so slowly that it couldn't possibly have any effect on the people or objects standing on it. But as science progressed, it became clear that the Earth's rotation is not only measurable, but critical to our understanding of the planet's physical dynamics. The idea that Earth's rotation had no impact on us wasn't just misleading, it completely disregarded key forces like gravity and centrifugal force. The betrayal wasn't in the scientific theory itself, but in how it held back advances in fields like physics and astronomy. The discovery of the Coriolis effect and the understanding of Earth's true movement through space completely shattered this outdated belief, showing that even basic assumptions in science could be dangerously wrong. But the misinterpretation of physical forces wasn't the only theory to crumble. Let's take a look at how ancient ideas about human biology led to grave errors in medical science. Chapter 32. The cold sore fallacy. In the 1960s, scientists believed that cold sores, caused by the herpes simplex virus, could be easily treated with the available medications. For years, scientists and doctors promoted simple, ineffective cures, claiming they could eliminate the virus altogether. But what they didn't realize was that herpes simplex is a chronic virus that cannot be cured, but can only be managed. The misleading information pushed patients to rely on ineffective treatments, causing unnecessary pain and frustration. The betrayal wasn't just in the inaccurate treatment, it was in the scientific community's reluctance to fully understand the virus, leading to decades of false hope. It wasn't until antiviral drugs like acyclovir came along that the medical community began to properly address the virus, but by then, millions had suffered needlessly from ineffective treatments. But this wasn't the only time science misunderstood a virus impact. Let's now explore how the infamous rat poison debacle led to another medical catastrophe. Chapter 33. The rat poison disaster in the early 20th century. Scientists hailed a new form of pesticide, what they believed to be an effective solution for killing rodents. The chemical, later known as warfarin, was used in small doses for decades to kill pests, but the scientific community didn't realize how dangerous it could be when consumed by humans in larger quantities. When rat poison became widely available, accidental poisoning incidents skyrocketed. What was supposed to help humanity eradicate pests turned into a deadly toxin, causing hundreds of deaths and hundreds of cases of poisoning. The betrayal wasn't just in the mismanagement of the chemical, it was in how the potential harm to humans was completely ignored in favor of solving the pest problem. Eventually, the risks of warfarin were understood, but not before the damage had been done. But this wasn't the only instance of harmful chemicals being used before their risks were fully understood. Let's explore the scientific blunder that almost destroyed a thriving ecosystem. Chapter 34. The rise of the silver bullet vaccines. For decades, the scientific community believed that a single vaccine could effectively eradicate entire diseases. The concept of the silver bullet, a one-size-fits-all solution to all viral and bacterial diseases, was tantalizing. However, as science advanced, it became clear that many viruses, like the flu, mutate too rapidly for a single vaccine to provide lasting immunity. The betrayal wasn't just in the oversimplification of viral behavior, it was in the misapplication of these one-size-fits-all vaccines. They worked for certain diseases but failed for others, creating false confidence in vaccines as the end-all solution to global health crises. The scientific community was forced to reframe its understanding of disease prevention, focusing on adaptive, long-term strategies. This blind rush to find a quick fix delayed the real breakthroughs in immunology, but vaccines weren't the only health miracle misjudged by science. Let's take a deeper look at how an early discovery about vitamins was turned into a marketing scam. Chapter 35, The Vitamin Craze in the Early 20th Century. Vitamins were heralded as magical cures for everything from scurvy to poor eyesight. Scientists believed that simply adding specific vitamins to one's diet would lead to perfect health. Vitamin C, for example, was seen as a miracle cure that could prevent all sorts of diseases, while vitamin D was promoted as the ultimate remedy for bone health. The craze grew so out of control that companies began selling vitamins in mass quantities, often in unregulated forms that were neither effective nor safe. The betrayal wasn't just in the overhyped promises, it was in the way these vitamins were marketed, often with no scientific backing, leading people to spend vast sums of money on ineffective treatments. It wasn't until later that science began to refine its understanding of vitamins, discovering that overuse could even cause harmful side effects. But the vitamin explosion wasn't the only time science got lost in a craze. Let's look at the true origins of one of the deadliest diseases humanity has ever faced. Chapter 36, The X-ray Disaster. When X-rays were first discovered in the late 19th century, they were hailed as one of the greatest breakthroughs in medical science. The ability to see inside the human body without surgery seemed like a miracle. Doctors and scientists quickly began using X-rays for everything from diagnosing bone fractures to detecting diseases like tuberculosis. However, in their enthusiasm, they ignored one crucial detail: the radiation from X-rays could be extremely harmful. In the early days, no one understood the long-term risks of exposure. Patients, medical staff, and even doctors themselves were often exposed to dangerous levels of radiation, unaware of the potential for burns, cancer, and genetic damage. The betrayal wasn't just in the ignorance, it was in how the medical community downplayed the risks, continuing to use X-rays indiscriminately for decades. It wasn't until the 1930s that the dangers of radiation exposure were widely acknowledged, but by then, many had already suffered severe health consequences. Despite its obvious benefits, the X-ray machine was a double-edged sword that cost many their health and lives. The story of the X-ray disaster serves as a harsh reminder of how the rush to embrace new technology can lead to disastrous long-term consequences. But this wasn't the only time science ignored the consequences of new technology. Let's take a look at another breakthrough that caused more harm than good, this time in the world of pesticides. Chapter 37, The Myth of the Caveman Diet. For decades, the idea of the caveman diet, also known as the Paleolithic or Paleo diet, dominated nutritional advice. It suggested that early humans thrived by eating only meat and avoiding processed foods, grains, and dairy. The belief was that modern humans should follow a similar diet for optimal health. This theory caught on like wildfire, with countless books, health gurus, and fitness experts promoting the idea that our ancestors' diet was the key to a perfect body and disease-free life. But modern anthropology and archaeology have debunked this simplistic view. Early humans had a highly varied diet, with evidence showing they ate a wide range of foods, including fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and even some grains. The caveman diet myth overlooked the adaptability and evolution of human diets, assuming that all early humans lived the same way across vastly different climates and periods. The betrayal wasn't just in the oversimplification of early human life, it was in how this flawed idea misled entire generations into adopting extreme and unsustainable eating habits. This false narrative caused confusion, led to unhealthy eating practices, and left people struggling to maintain diets that were never truly based on historical facts. But the caveman diet wasn't the only nutritional myth that took hold. Let's now look at how science got the basics of human blood completely wrong. Chapter 38. The power of breathing through mouths. For a long time, it was believed that breathing through the mouth and nose was equally effective in terms of oxygen intake and health. This misconception led to a widespread disregard for the importance of nasal breathing, especially during physical exertion. For decades, doctors and medical professionals focused on conditions like asthma and allergies, but rarely did they consider the long-term effects of habitual mouth breathing. What scientists missed was the fact that the nose plays a vital role in regulating airflow, filtering harmful particles, and even enhancing oxygen absorption. Nasal breathing also helps with proper oxygen exchange, improves lung function, and supports the cardiovascular system. The betrayal wasn't just in the oversight, it was in how science failed to recognize that the human respiratory system was far more sophisticated than initially believed. Mouth breathing, when habitual, can cause long-term issues, including sleep apnea, dental problems, and even structural changes to the face. The failure to grasp the full importance of nasal breathing delayed many health solutions, leading to years of unnecessary suffering. In modern medicine, breathing techniques are finally gaining recognition, but this knowledge should have come much sooner. But this wasn't the only time science failed to grasp something so fundamental to human health. Let's explore how the world's greatest invention of communication was obscured by legal battles and scientific rivalry. Chapter 39. The invention of the light bulb. When we think of the light bulb, Thomas Edison's name immediately comes to mind. Hess often credited with inventing the electric light, and while he did play a significant role in its development, the story is far more complicated. In reality, many inventors contributed to the creation of the light bulb, but Edison's fame as the inventor of the modern electric light bulb is due to his business acumen and successful marketing. In fact, several inventors, including Sir Humphrey Davy, Warren de la Rue, and Joseph Swan, had made significant advancements in electric lighting before Edison. The betrayal wasn't just in the misattribution of the invention, it was in how Edison's public battles and patent wars overshadowed the collaborative nature of the breakthrough. Edison fought legal battles against Swan and other inventors, claiming credit for the light bulb while downplaying their contributions. This fight not only misled the public about who truly made the discovery, but also perpetuated the myth of a lone genius responsible for the electric light. The true story of the light bulb is one of many minds working together, but corporate and historical narratives often stripped that collaboration from the record. But the story of invention doesn't end with the light bulb. Let's look at how the scientific community misjudged human blood for centuries, leading to devastating consequences. Chapter 40. The misuse of MRI machines. Magnetic resonance imaging MRI machines revolutionized medicine, allowing doctors to peer inside the human body without the need for invasive surgery. They were hailed as a breakthrough in diagnostic technology, offering clearer images of soft tissues than X-rays or CT scans could. But as the technology advanced, so did its overuse. Early on, the medical community believed MRIs were the go-to tool for diagnosing nearly every condition. The issue? The high costs, unnecessary scans, and overdiagnosis led to a slew of issues. Many patients underwent MRIs that weren't needed, exposing them to unnecessary procedures and potentially creating false positives. The betrayal wasn't just in the overuse, it was in the way the excitement about a new technology led to its unchecked application. Doctors, eager to embrace this innovation, didn't always consider the potential harms. In some cases, MRIs led to unnecessary treatments, surgeries, or anxiety over false results. Over time, the medical community began to refine MRI usage, but the damage had already been done. Patients were subjected to unnecessary tests and procedures without fully understanding the risks. But MRIs weren't the only technology misused in medicine. Let's look at how another breakthrough failed to live up to its promises, leaving millions in the dark. Chapter 41. The frozen mammoth's fallacy. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the discovery of frozen mammoths in Siberia led to wild speculation about ancient climate events. The frozen carcasses of these long-extinct animals seemed to suggest that they had been flash frozen in a sudden, extreme climate event. Theories of massive, rapid climate shifts swirled, claiming that the Earth experienced sudden freezes that trapped these ancient beasts in a matter of days. This idea fit into popular theories of catastrophism, the belief that the Earth had undergone dramatic and rapid changes in short periods. But as more studies were conducted, it became clear that the truth was far different. Mammoths, like many other prehistoric creatures, were buried over thousands of years, not frozen instantly in catastrophic events. The cold of the Siberian permafrost gradually preserved their bodies, and the mammoths died as a result of normal environmental changes, not sudden freezes. The betrayal wasn't just in the misinterpretation of these animals' preservation, it was in how these wild theories were used to push sensational ideas about the Earth's past. These dramatic misconceptions delayed the real understanding of ancient climates, ecosystems, and extinction events. They also fueled public fascination with cataclysmic events, distracting from the more plausible, scientifically supported explanations of how species like the mammoth became extinct. But the truth about mammoths wasn't the only story that science got dramatically wrong. Let's look at a deadly theory about pesticides that nearly led to irreversible environmental damage. Chapter 42. The golden rice fiasco. In the late 20th century, the development of genetically modified GM crops was touted as a solution to world hunger. Among these was golden rice, genetically engineered to contain a high amount of provitamin A, beta-carotene, designed to combat vitamin A deficiency in developing countries. Initially hailed as a miracle, golden rice was promoted as the cure for malnutrition, especially in impoverished areas where vitamin A deficiencies caused blindness and death. However, despite the promising claims, the reality was much more complex. The public's excitement quickly faded when it was revealed that growing golden rice in large quantities would require significant adjustments to local agricultural practices, infrastructure, and soil quality. It was also discovered that the rice's ability to deliver enough vitamin A to have a measurable impact was far less than expected. What followed was a campaign to dismiss concerns, branding opposition as anti-science. The betrayal wasn't just in the flawed science, it was in how the GM crop was rushed to the market without addressing the full spectrum of potential risks and long-term consequences. It ignored the underlying issues of food access, agricultural infrastructure, and nutritional variety. The tragic reality is that, decades later, golden rice has not lived up to its promises, leaving millions still without the proper nutrients it was supposed to provide. But this wasn't the only time science rushed to fix a global problem with flawed solutions. Let's now explore the scientific blunder that altered the world of agriculture forever. Chapter 43. The race to the moon. The space race of the 1960s was a defining moment in human history. The race to land a man on the moon became the ultimate battle between the United States and the Soviet Union, a technological contest for global supremacy. Yet, the narrative surrounding this race is far from the pure pursuit of knowledge that it's often portrayed as. The U.S. government, desperate to outpace the Soviets, funneled massive amounts of money into space exploration, but many of the decisions made were influenced more by geopolitics than scientific integrity. For example, NASA's focus on reaching the moon became so intense that issues like the ethical treatment of astronauts, the environmental impact of rockets, and the long-term viability of lunar exploration were ignored. Even more startling was the fact that some of the moon discoveries made by astronauts were distorted or exaggerated for the sake of boosting national pride. The betrayal wasn't just in the space race itself, it was in the way science was weaponized for political gain. The rush to the moon overshadowed the true scientific exploration of space, and the competition led to a missed opportunity to collaborate globally on understanding the universe. The space race should have been about advancing human knowledge, but instead, it became a symbol of ideological conflict, with science serving as a tool in that larger struggle. But the moon landing wasn't the only space-related theory that took the world by storm and turned out to be flawed. Let's look at how a misconception about planets like Mars delayed our understanding of extraterrestrial life. Chapter 44, The Cold Fusion Debacle in 1989. Two electrochemists, Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann, made a bombshell announcement. They had discovered cold fusion, a process that could potentially create limitless, cheap energy by fusing atoms together at room temperature. Their claim was sensational. The very process that powers the sun could be replicated on Earth in a laboratory setting, at room temperature, without the need for massive amounts of energy. The world buzzed with excitement at the prospect of solving the energy crisis. However, the excitement was short-lived. When other scientists tried to replicate the results, they failed. The cold fusion claim was quickly exposed as a scientific fraud. The reaction didn't produce the expected energy output, and further testing revealed flaws in the original experiment. Despite being debunked, cold fusion became one of the most significant scientific scandals of the 20th century. The betrayal wasn't just in the failure of the experiment, it was in the way the scientific community rushed to validate the discovery, driven by the allure of limitless energy. The damage was done, though. Cold fusion became a symbol of scientific hype and the dangers of premature public claims, leaving the energy world searching for new, legitimate solutions. But cold fusion wasn't the only time science let excitement and greed cloud its judgment. Let's look at the dangerous theory of eugenics, which did far more harm than good. Chapter 45, The Disastrous Golden Rice Fiasco. The development of golden rice was heralded as a breakthrough in the fight against malnutrition in developing countries. This genetically engineered rice, infused with beta-carotene, was meant to combat widespread vitamin A deficiency, which causes blindness and even death in children. It seemed like the perfect solution, a scientific miracle that could solve a nutritional crisis. Yet the reality proved to be far different. Despite decades of development, golden rice has not been successfully implemented on a large scale. It turned out that the rice doesn't deliver enough vitamin A to make a significant difference in the populations it was meant to help. What's worse, the rollout of golden rice has been hindered by regulatory hurdles, political opposition, and distrust in genetically modified organisms, GMOs. The betrayal wasn't just in the failed science, it was in the way this solution was marketed to the public as the answer to a complex problem, without addressing the deeper issues of poverty, food security, and infrastructure. Instead of tackling the root causes of malnutrition, the scientific community prioritized an incomplete technological fix with devastating consequences for the communities that were supposed to benefit. But this wasn't the only scientific breakthrough that failed when it was rushed. Let's look at another medical disaster that could have been avoided with more careful research. Final payoff. The shocking lies of science have not only misled us, they've shaped entire eras, manipulated history, and caused irreparable harm. These betrayals didn't just result in incorrect theories or failed experiments, they cost lives, slowed progress, and kept humanity trapped in false narratives for far too long. From the flat earth theory to cold fusion, science has been both a beacon of truth and a tool of Deception. The most unsettling part? These lies were often driven by power, politics, or the desire for quick results, rather than a pursuit of truth. But each mistake, each betrayal, has led to a deeper understanding of our world and a stronger resolve to question the unquestionable. The cost of these deceptions was high, but the lessons we've learned? Priceless. Now, armed with knowledge, we must continue to challenge the boundaries of science and seek out the truth, no matter where it leads.